My background, where's the Zotter, is more from the science side. I've got dragged into this for two reasons. One is the industry saw fit to give me the opportunity to be their chairman, and right now we're working very closely with the government to see if we can meet their business growth agenda. How do we do that? That's to double the value. The second thing is we've got involved in a certification program because about 10 years ago, well, it's longer than that now, 15 years ago, we were the first major whitefish fishery in the world to get under the Marine Stewardship Council, and that's quite a long part of our operations. So it got us thinking, if we're getting extra value for being sustainable, is that going to last? Is that the right way to do it? Is there another story? And this is about the other story. So let's see where we're placed. The good thing is that we've got what the world needs. We've got food that's natural, healthy and safe. And if you look at the projections, and we've seen some of this before, so I'll move quite quickly through it. Some of the other speakers have covered this from another way. We need to increase the food production by 40% to 2030 and by 70% to 2050. Fortunately, we're well placed to take advantage of that increased demand. This is a graph on that from CSIRO, and you can see this is the section we're in. So if we're looking to double the value of the revenue from seafood exports by 2025, the purple area, and that's the demand will increase by about 40% for food generally, including, of course, seafood. The other thing that a lot of people don't know is that there are now more people who are urban than are rural. And over the 10-year period, that's a little segment, what that means is increasing wealth, increasing middle class, increasing leisure time, increasing discernment over food, increasing discerning customers, more opportunity for us. In our traditional markets, the growth is considered to be flat. Now, this is just a measure by the growth in world middle classes. We're not expecting much growth in North America and Europe over the next, out to 2050, 15 years. The middle classes will grow in the world, and particularly in Asia Pacific. So the big growth opportunities are not in our traditional markets, they're in Asia and in the Asian Rim. What about seafood production? Well, right at the moment, 74% of seafood production is from wild capture or natural seafood. 26% is from aquaculture or nurtured seafood. What's that going to look like at 2025? There is going to be an increase in the seafood supply, most of which is going to come from aquaculture, so that the ratio will change from 57 to 43. So where are we? Well, we've had steady export growth since 2001. 85% of our seafood is exported. It's worth about 1.52 billion. It's about 2% equivalent of the world international seafood trade. I read the other day that I think dairy is we produce about 2% of the dairy production, so it gives you some idea of relative scale. At the moment, 82% of our returns are from wild capture and 18% from aquaculture, but we'll probably see that balance change. I'd say we're less vulnerable to price fluctuations than dairy, even though we're dealing in different markets. But the government's challenge to us is how can we double our revenues by 2025? So where do we need to be? Here's a graph, the baseline is the grey, and if we extrapolate that out to 2025, and MPI have independently done this, we're looking at industry a little below $2 million. So how do we add value on top of that? The exercise we've done, and I won't go into great details here, but I'm happy to later, there will be some small volume increases. Some of our fisheries are being rebuilt and there'll be some volume there. Add to that some branding and certification, which is really what I want to dwell on today. There's some opportunities for value add, and there's a number of companies investing quite strongly in non-food products from seafood raw material. We've approached our government to reform the QMS, and we think that will add some value to the fishery. And then there's the rising star aquaculture. So we can plot a course over the next 10 years which can easily see us doubling the revenues. Unfortunately, we've been shown up by our first speaker who said we're not thinking big enough. So how would we double revenues? Well, we've got a price increase running at about 3% a year. This is independent of exchange rate. Of course, the exchange rate's moved in our favour, but if you look at real-world prices, since 2000, index of seafood prices increased by about 3% a year. There will be some wild capture volume increases due to improved management. The branding and certification, which I'll talk about in a minute. Increase of use of raw material. QMS reforms, misspelt. Aquaculture, particularly new space. I mean, 1 hectare of the right aquacultural space will produce $20 million for salmon. Find that on land, unless you're growing something which is illegal, it's a fairly good return. So seafood in context, what started me on this journey? Well, we were being told by people whose interests weren't necessarily aligned with ours, but they're emotional people and they quite strongly believe in what they say, that we needed to be sustainable. But there is no agreed definition of environmentally sustainable, which is a problem. Government scientists and NGOs differ, and even going to the Marine Stewardship Council and getting their qualification, there's a number of parties who will say we're still not sustainable. So it's a movable feast, and it's probably a destination you'll never arrive at, and it's expensive. What is acceptable, and how do we measure this? Well, there is a worldwide need for food that's nutritious, safe and sustainable. And there's a balance here between preservation and conservation. There's also a need to know, which is not given to our customers or to the people that buy food from them, that all forms of food production necessitate environmental change, and that actually seafood production is amongst the most environmentally benign. That's the contrast we need to put to our markets. If we had our definition of sustainable is to provide our children and grandchildren with the same choices that we have, to me that pretty much cuts where we should be. Otherwise we get an increasingly technical definition of what sustainability is, and you get an argument like we had this morning about if we're not doing 40%, we're not sustainable, and MSY is too low. The word bunkum comes to mind, but when you get into the technical discussions you get different levels of knowledge, so you just spend days and days arguing over terms. Professor Ray Hilborn, who you're all familiar with, has done quite a lot of work on comparative energy and spatial and carbon and water uses of protein, and we are the green protein. We've got impacts are significantly less at sea on land. The environmental changes are not permanent. You remove a marine farm, it doesn't take long till there's no trace of it. Even the studies we're seeing on trawling, which is supposed to be a destructive practice, at least some NGOs want it to be ruled as such, at depths up to about 200 metres. It only takes a few years until any impacts are discernible. We cut the forest off to grow farms, there's significant environmental damage. And of course, we've got a natural and pure product. There's very little use of fresh water, no pesticides, herbicides, hormones, or the troublesome GMOs. More reasons to be cheerful. Well, the global population growth is 1.6, but the global seafood production growth is nearly double that. Nutritionally, seafood is part of the solution, not part of the problem. So that brings us, it's time for us to change the conversation and tell our story. It's not just about sustainability, that's the given. What is it about? Before we know what it's about, we've got to know who we're talking to, how do they listen? Do they listen in a conference, they listen digitally, they talk to each other, and what do they value? There was a recent survey done by Stormline, and they're kind enough to allow me to use the key findings of it here. They surveyed 1,000 respondents in these areas, 11% in New Zealand, UK, US, Canada and Australia. And they asked them questions about seafood. Of course, in these surveys, the answers often reflect the question. But 95% of the people they asked, who are seafood consumers, were unsure if what they were buying was wild or farmed or wild. 84% thought the meat labels were clearer than the fish labels. 41% sometimes read the label. 92% found the label confusing. 80% a bit ignoring the label. But what are their concerns? Only 31% of the people buying seafood were troubled by whether the stock was sustainable. 23% thought that the country of origin was important, and we ranked quite well in that. 20% were concerned about environmental impacts, 13% freshness, 11% how it's caught. 49% would consume more if the capture method sustainability and orange were easy to determine, but 33% would not. So out of this, what you get from these surveys is a mix of signals, but one thing you do know is that more information would be helpful, and the second thing you know is that sustainability isn't uppermost in our customers' minds. We put together a high-level sociological demographic study using 300 plus reports, and we just looked at the spending, consumption and purchasing preference by demographics within selected countries. We limited it to China, United States, Europe, United Kingdom and Australia, being markets which we have strong relationships with seafood. And we put 4 lenses on: a global lens, what are they saying generally? A country lens, how does that differ within country? A generational lens, how do the young people, the middle-aged people and the old people think about food? What are they, when they put their hand in the supermarket to pull a piece of fish out, what is in the thought process? They're going to take this piece and not that, or fish, not protein, or fresh fish, not so on. And then the value lens. We tried to look at what value attributes they had, which were beyond buying the fish, like is it ecologically sound? Is it come from a rainforest? Was it caught by somebody with a cloth hat and gumboots and, you know, those sorts of things. The key demographics, well, it's a bit like Stormline survey. It depends who you ask and what questions, but the purchasing preferences and values differ with age groups, not surprising, but the way we communicate with each age group, or the way they listen, also differs. So we have to think about different communications for different age groups. Younger generations are very similar around the world. There's a theme through that. If you're young and the X and Y generation, pretty much the same. They don't go outside, they're globalised and they're digitally connected. So that's Generation Z and Y. They're tech comfortable, they mistrust political systems and the government, the big companies. They're constantly digitally connected and they're isolated from their physical environment. 45% of the world in those markets was of that age group. That's the future. Those are the people that are going to be buying our seafood in 10 to 20 years. Generation X, fewer of them, more individualistic, different bundle. And then there's the oldies, those that are 50 years or older. They're work-centric, respect for authority, loyal and hard-working, but they also buy seafood. And they've got a lot of discretionary spending, but they've got different purchasing patterns. What are the key demographics here? Seafood consumption per capita in our traditional markets is declining, Japan, East Asia and Pacific, all stable, Europe or US, but it's growing in China. That's consumption per capita. This is work from the World Bank. But it's not just consumption per capita that matters, it's how many of them are, because if there's more people, even if they're eating less seafood, there's still an opportunity. So we looked at where the affluent customers are. Where are the people with the money who might want to buy our seafood and are willing to pay more? I haven't done much in the willing to pay more here. We've got a database which is owned by Deepwater Group, which I'm sure they'll allow access to anybody that wants to use it. Here's the number of affluent that is greater than 51,000 New Zealand dollars, predicted in 20,000. There'll be 82 million in the US, 11 million in UK, 64 million in Europe, 2 million in Australia, but nearly half will be in China, 188 million. So even though I'll move on from that because I'm going to run out of time. What assurance do they seek? We started this project, Jeremy and I, about 2 years ago, and we thought sustainability is not the answer. We shouldn't sell our products on sustainability. It should be like food safety. It should be a given. Of course it's not going to kill you. Of course it's sustainable. What are the other attributes to lift up the value chain? Is it labour? Do people care about that? Energy use? Provenance, authentic, where it comes from? Do they care about whether it's a natural product? Do they care whether it's sustainable, healthy, safe, or the water use? In some countries, water use is a big issue. We don't have that yet here. Or whether it's government-backed. Some people said they'll buy it because it's government-endorsed. We reviewed the literature to assess which of these had relevance. And this is the answer across the board, varies in different markets. I have to say, we excluded price and taste, which are probably the two main drivers, because we took that as a given, and that's another matter. They're not very interested in labour, not very interested in energy use. Sustainable, yes, but it could be how it's not. There's no universal decision or definition, so sustainable is a variable thing. Not government backed. So we're left with 5 attributes. The terms are defined and interpreted differently in different countries, so they don't all mean the same people. And some people get confused. If it's natural, they think it's safe or sustainable. Why don't we replace authentic with New Zealand, and it starts to look like what could be the basis of lifting up our seafood value. So where we got to, if we established our product as natural and told the world what we mean by natural, if we codified our product is safe because it complies with all the safety requirements, healthy and sustainable, together we can build a New Zealand set of value attributes which will reposition the fish from where we are now, seafood. Our affluent customers, the ones we found, they're all politically active, they're influential, they're normally intelligent and inquiring, they research what they buy. The young ones in particular don't trust us and they don't trust government, they'll research online and in digital form. They are concerned about nutrition, health, natural and safety. They're less concerned in a ranking about the environment, but they are concerned about it. But if that's a given, then it's not something we need to attribute. We should remember one of our strengths is seafood's in limited supply. It's a scarcity. We should talk about exclusivity. It's the other side. That's an advantage. And we should talk about our seafood, and it's an experience to have our seafood. There's a simple piece of scampi from New Zealand. It's one of the best products we've got out of New Zealand on a plate. This is how we should be selling our seafood. So I just put this slide in quickly to show what different countries, the key attributes they had. There's similar themes coming up. They're not ranked in priority. China was the interesting one because there seemed to be far more importance on having something that's safe, having something that's a luxury, having something that's not from China. And the conversations that we were party to and doing this research, 70% of the discussions in Chinese, in digital networks about food had New Zealand in them in a positive sense. So we have the image there already. I don't want to be China-centric because it's one of a number, and if we tie our future to China alone, I think we'll find that that's a foolish strategy. But they do consume, well, they will by 2030, 38% of global seafood production. They will be producing 57% of the aquaculture, still producing 17% of global captures, and 37% of global seafood. So they're a big party. 3 attributes we looked at that people often confuse: natural, healthy and safe. 66% will buy seafood by brand, by preference, because they think it's got these attributes, natural, healthy and safe. And we've seen this through the Waitrose and Coles sorts of plans. 80% prefer seafood without genetically modified organisms. 85% look for improvement health, and 85% they'll eat it because it's safe. So what are the take-home messages? The world wants what we want: safe, natural, healthy, sustainable food. With increasing wealth and increasing numbers in middle classes, high value demand for our seafood will continue to increase. We should engage in a broader conversation with our customers. Just have sustainability and food safety as baselines. No, don't put them out there as major features. All forms of food production impact on the environment. Seafood is the green protein. We should make the most of that. We should tell our story: safe, natural, healthy, sustainable and scarce. It's not enough to simply tell people we have the best seafood, because we do believe it. We need to communicate it in a transparent and integrated story of provenance. And it's easy to do if we get online. It shouldn't cost us a lot of money. Prime Minister, we've got the best seafood in the world. Let's take it to the world. Thank you very much.